Button is pushed. Now everyone has to stay in this room. Sorry. This is HAX the Web, and I had a lot of coffee, and there was a car accident ahead of us, so I had to drink it all real fast, and then we had to run over here. So me and Tom are super pumped to be here today.
Woo!
Yeah, what he just said. So, has anyone heard of HAX before? Except Becca, don't raise your hand. Yes, two people. Twitter works. Okay, so.
Everyone, my name's Tom Verghese, but you can just call me Tom Barr.
And me, I'm Bryan Ollendyke, we're BTO Pro. I had a lot of coffee cups. All right, so let's get this kicked off. You may have heard of this project. It's a project I work on, talk about more typically. It's called Elm's Learning Network. You really don't need to know what it is, but it's for education. And basically, we end up building a whole ton of stuff using Drupal as a result. And so whenever we get a big idea in education and we need to stuff that somewhere, we basically take that idea, put it at a subdomain, and then we point students to it. It's more or less all you need to know at a high level. So this isn't a radical concept like other vendors are doing this, right? You got Google and you got Microsoft. But one of the issues with doing this, right, you gain innovation, right? You can come out with the new YouTube thing, and you can come out with the Drive thing, and you can come out with search, and you can brand them all differently. However, then you've branded everything differently. So what we've seen is Google and Microsoft really try to put some form of design conformity in place. Maybe you've heard of Materialize or Material Design Framework. That's kind of what this is an attempt to do, so that everybody's building things cohesively, so that even though it's not built by the same team, it all looks the same. So we tried to adopt something similar. So this would be a typical course space we have, and you might be at that address. You might go to a different course space. You might go to a different system, right? And so there's some similarities between these as we move between products, if you want to look at it that way. It's not traditional website building in this regard. So those systems have lots of interfaces of their own, which then need design consistency. They might have students having a conversation, so we need design consistency. They might need a grading interface, so we need design consistency. So HAX the Web is born out of this context, right? That we have a need for design consistency. We have lots of systems, and we have lots of big problems to solve. And I will pardon in advance that there are harsh realities ahead. So there's going to be a lot of warning emojis. Okay, so before we get to what the heck we're on about, what is authoring experience? Let's start there, because HAX is short for Headless Authoring Experience. So at the beginning of the history of the web, as we all know, started with Space Jam back in the 90s. We were trying to come up with how do people go about making these things, right? So there was no authoring experience then. You had to know HTML in order to do your job. We fast forward to today, we've got content contributors. And so what we're talking about is that those contributors to our systems are users as well. We need to think about them in the entire life cycle of building out the site. And you love your contributors, right? We all love our contributors. Don't you? Don't you love your contributors? Yet you give them one of these to dump everything into, okay? Or that's WordPress. Let's not knock WordPress. Let's knock ourselves. Or you give them this to dump everything into with tokens. Does anyone use tokens before throughout the last decade? Yeah, they're fantastic. That's a constrained design thing. All right, well, move over to Drupal. We'll give tokens in Drupal, in CK Editor. Yes. Does anyone know what this is? It's tokens. There's another name for it. It's anarchy. This is total anarchy, as coined by Michael Potter, a friend of mine. So what we try to do is constrain the anarchy of allowing people to have this big body field where they do whatever they wanted. And we went towards this route. We went towards templates. And so if we said, well, we've got this template thing, you click the button, and that's awesome, it's in there, except really it's just a different form of anarchy, right? Those templates get out of date, they might be inaccessible, and now you've got inaccessible stuff there kind of forever. So we move on to more advanced page building things, but really we just keep running into anarchy. This is Divi from WordPress land. Let's not, without making fun of ourselves, there's paragraphs. How many people have built stuff with paragraphs? Really stinking cool module, not knocking the project and the work put into it. I'm mocking that we're all attempting to solve this problem, and we're all creating these fragmented ways of doing so because, oh, there's panels. Can you explain to a client why they might have one site and one versus the other? It's pretty hard in a design meeting. So, fast forward to D8, we've got layouts. Again, we showed 4 different ways of just basically attempting to jockey what this page does. I'm not knocking these approaches, they're all valid approaches, but I guarantee that this was said by a marketing manager boss person. So if we just have enough training, we'll have slightly less anarchy. Would be a less positive way of framing all of the construction and knowledge that then needs to go into things like Divi or panels in order to work. So really, it's just anarchy, but it's new, and we're probably not off the island. Our PHP has gotten off the island, but our design frameworks have not. So we're all toying with authoring experience, right? That's about having content contributors build out this thing so we can have these flexible layouts. But we're not really unique. So much like in PHP we weren't unique and we went to Symfony, we really need to start doing this on the front end and not just say like, well, we adopted jQuery, woo. And I don't know if anyone knows this, but the sky is falling, okay, people? The sky is going to come crashing down on us, as quoted by a C-level manager boss person. And so what do I mean by that? I mean, Drupal has stagnated. We have to be honest about this. Drupal and not Drupal specifically, but PHP in the larger sense has stagnated. Has anyone heard of this? This thing? Right? So this is WordPress's response to that stagnation. Let's just obliterate half of our community by building this thing in there, if you've seen what people's opinions are. Very strong opinions in both ways. But maybe we should really think about this hard before we go about pushing this into Drupal. So there is a talk coming up, and this blog post was made recently about, hey, here's Gutenberg running in Drupal. And what are you getting? You're giving your people a content authoring experience, a very superior website tonight style content authoring experience. I won't doubt that. It's going to be talked about over in Drupal Europe. If you're going, why do I think this is another form of anarchy? So this is the output that you see in the page from that. Basically, you're taking that body area, and whenever you're creating things in Gutenberg, you end up generating this like JSON object stuff. And so for someone who works in education, and we build out content, and that content needs to live way longer than any one little site, the notion of having my content wrapped around things that have WP or Drupal prefixing in it is pretty scary, because I eventually want to get off of the Drupal island in certain cases, or the WordPress island. And so we're talking about invoking anarchy all the way down into the page content, and the lock-in is included free of charge. So then to get out of it, I just need to burn all my content down. Does anyone have a government site? Maybe those government pages need to live on a little bit longer than the vendor who's going to come on site. Yay, like 2 people at least agree with that. It's like we're at a government conference or something, right? Tom. It's confusing. So this was a quote said to me by our graphic designer. He used to be involved in Elms, and he just stopped. I mean, he got a different job, but he was like, why does Drupal care about my design? I don't know Drupal. I'm not able to contribute as a result of that. He's a very talented design person, worked in, when we were in, TPL land, you'll say, of like Drupal 6, and he'd just dump his designs in there after making them static. He couldn't contribute anymore because of how advanced the pre-processing engines had gotten. Why does he need to learn PHP in order to contribute a design asset, is what he said. So, to which I will counter this. From now on, the CMS will learn your design, and your design will never learn your CMS. I am boldly proposing decoupling as much as possible. And I threw this quote in as well for the dystopian future that we hopefully will arrive at. Gutenberg has me trapped forever using React and Gutenberg. Why didn't we just adopt web components? So what do? The sky is falling. Does anyone know? Anyone know what we do? We adopt Drupal 6, okay? We go backwards, all right? All this progression forward got too complicated. Mike could contribute in Drupal 6. We need Mike. We need to get Mike back on the island. But I'm not going to go into that again. I did. If you saw a previous talk, I did that. I ranted. You can go back and watch it at DrupalCon. I talked about how amazing Drupal 6 was, and then half the room got up and left. So what the point of that is that there's a module you can get for Drupal 6 and 7 called Web Components. And the Web Components module helps bring you down this paradigm of front-end assets that are teaching the CMS how to handle them. But we don't need any framework anymore. We don't, you might have said like, well, okay, you mentioned at the beginning, hey, let's not use jQuery, let's standardize on something and get off the island with Drupal from a front-end perspective the way we did with PHP. But I would say we don't need a framework because the web is a platform. Tom, you say this. Say, wait, what is the platform?
Wait, what is the platform?
That's an excellent question, Tom. So the web is the platform, okay? This specification, this is available on webcomponents.org. You can go there right now and read about it. But effectively, your browser and all the browser communities have agreed that if we implement these 4 things, ignore the fact that there's 5 listed, but if we implement these 4 things, then we will all know web components. And most critical, I just added this yesterday, in Firefox, see these say developing and they have polyfills for 2 parts of this. They will be, or at least are slated to be in the October 23rd release, which means you will need even less polyfills to do what we are proposing. So, why web components? Before we talk about what it is. So, web components net us design and component uniformity. So, has anyone heard of Pattern Lab? Think Pattern Lab, but it's actually kind of more pre-programmed into the thing. You bring your mental model aligned with Pattern Lab, but you're actually building in this spec called web components. So, really briefly, if this is what we used to do, right? If I wanted to make this link be, point to something, be the color blue, and be a name, I'd write some HTML, right? Fundamentally, what it looks like when you go to implement, if I were to say make a new web component, a web component is a custom HTML tag that the browser understands natively or close to natively via polyfills. I don't want to get in the weeds of that. But so we can create a new thing called my-button, link equals link.com, put in their name, and it could do the exact same thing as this style block. So that abstraction is huge for long-term sustainability. And you might say, what, Tom? You might say,
Sustainable what?
Sustain what? That's right, Tom. But sustainability, because for the first time, our code and the things that we're visualizing can actually be design sustainable. What do I mean? So I mean, you're going to go and teach your content contributors how to write img src equals, semicolon / really cool GIFs on Tom's computer / explosion.gif. Right? You're going to tell someone to do that when they really need to have that used car sales site or whatever that is with like all the blinking explosions and flashing lights everywhere. Or could you tell them and communicate to your design team, hey, we're going to put an awesome explosion there. So we can actually write semantic looking tags, right? You can read that and go, oh, it's an awesome explosion. I know what to expect there. But why is that so critical? Because then we can rewrite the guts of what that tag is to be whatever we want. So if day 1 this rolls out, and I've got img src, the brackets is data binding, and that the browser basically sees that awesome explosion and interprets it as this img part, a year from now, we could swap out what the awesome explosion is, and every location that references that is updated simultaneously. We've effectively eliminated concern of accessibility in this regard. And I'm not going to say we don't care about accessibility. What I mean is we can attack systematically accessibility. So if we make a link tag, and that link tag is implemented everywhere, if there's an accessibility problem with the link tag, we update it in one place. We don't have to think about where it's been rolled out. How many hours we wasted tracking down templates that live in certain locations in a past life? Or at least I did all the time up until about a year and a half ago when we started doing this. So there's huge implications for accessibility. Another area for that. You all have put video players on the web, right? So we put the video tag, and go, yay, we have a video, it's accessible. Sort of, right? There's a lot of other considerations for accessibility surrounding just video. Well, what if we made our own video player that not only gave us design uniformity, but also could be something we can maintain sustainably and accessibly? So that's what another member of our team, Nikki Kaufman's doing. This is her video player. So the other aspect of this whole approach is when we roll this out, start rolling this out in production, like we're about to in like 2 or 3 weeks, you all can take it. And then you can have the most accessible video player that exists. This is more accessible than Able Player, which is previously the most accessible video player that exists. And if it's not accessible, you can all improve it, and then we can target and improve that one thing in our build flows. But what about developer experience? Tom, do you know CSS, HTML, and basic JavaScript?
When I interned for you, no. After the internship, a little bit, but I mean...
That was the wrong answer, Tom. You're supposed to be, yes, I have a baseline knowledge of...
Yes,
that's fantastic, Tom.
I have a baseline knowledge.
So, Tom, revelation. You know web components, then.
I do?
If you know those 3 things already. So why don't you tell people why?
All right. I'm going to give you the intern's crash course post-lunch of what web components are. I was not paid by Bryan, by the way, so if it's missing a couple gaps, blame him. But no, in all seriousness, web components are super easy because all you have to do is, you see on the top, all you're importing is Polymer. You're not installing anything, you're not waiting for anything. It's just a simple import of Polymer. And then the best thing is, as we saw this in this image before, all you have to do is just reference awesome explosion up there, and then down below you're just data binding that awesome explosion to image. And as Bryan said before, anytime you want to change that image, it will change systematically everywhere, right? And the best thing about web components is scope. CSS and JavaScript is scoped within the web component, so you don't have to worry about all this crazy CSS managing this and that, and it's just so much anarchy before, Bryan.
But I thought you had to learn Sass in order to participate in our build flows, Tom. Didn't you have to learn Sass?
I learned a little.
No, you're not supposed to say I learned a little, Tom.
I did not learn any. I'm just messing with Bryan because he's messing with me. No, you don't have to know any Sass because it's just super simple. And then look, this is the JavaScript scoping I mentioned before. In Awesome Explosion, we have events. Tap when the mouse is over the explosion and the mouse is out of the explosion. Right? And then it's all scoped within this web component. You don't have to worry about that JavaScript, that event enacting in any other part of the website. It's all within the web component itself. And we're not just using Legos just for fun. Web components are building blocks, little small building blocks that you can use to create anything you want. Just like when you were a kid, you want to create a fire truck or a ship or a rocket. You can do the same thing with web components. You can make your websites blow your customer's mind, right? It's crazy, it's cool. I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous. And then even if you go to our LRN components repo on GitHub, our team has posted 193 different web components that you can use, you can bring down. And let's say, hey, I don't like this one little aspect. You can change it and push it up to, you could fork it. Web components are super easy to implement, super easy to tweak to whatever you want. So what's the point of us talking about web components and how does this integrate with HAX? Well, I'm happy you asked, person in the back row, or is that my imagination? Same thing we did with Polymer, we're just importing HAX. And then whatever you want, you just put in within the HAX body tag, and guess what you get? Authoring Experience.
We need more sparkles.
Sparkles?
Or something, like you need glitter.
You know
bomb
what
or
I'm
something.
working on, Bryan?
Yeah.
A Sparkles web component.
Well, it would be sparkles hyphen component, because you need a hyphen in order for the spec to be correct.
You're right, Sparkles hyphen component. Next year, guys, watch. I'll give it back to Bryan.
All right, so as Tom mentioned, we kind of can reference other components in what we're building. And so this is how you get the Lego bricks analogy, is I take my component, it starts real small. I started with icons, and I just made an icon, and I bubbled up to a button. And a button gets into a card, and a card gets into a grid, and you just keep attacking your design asset that way. Very similar to principles of atomic design as expressed in Pattern Lab. So in the case of HAX, what we're talking about is a single tag that, if placed on the interface, will provide all of the authoring experience for editing the page. So what do we need as far as an integration layer? Because clearly there's something more than that, right? You can't just like edit stuff on the web without a backend. And so we've been able to reduce the backend down to this. Effectively, content is placed between those tags, as Tom showed. So if we have a CK editor-based paradigm of yesteryear, we can wrap that same text in a HAX-body tag. Then we need an endpoint to load some directions, which there's all kind of documentation for, which basically just says these are the rules by which HAX operates. Then we need a place to send that when someone hits save, right? So it has to go to a backend somewhere. And then optionally a place to save media, right? So if I drag and drop an image, it knows to save it someplace. And that's actually optional. So you're all gonna go and implement this thing that we didn't tell you any of the spec about. Or you're gonna get the HAX module for Drupal 6. So we can go back to Drupal 6, obviously. But this also works in 7 and 8. And so I don't know this for a fact, but this is probably one of the few modules on Drupal.org that has total feature parity and is maintained 6, 7, and 8. Why? Because there's almost no code to it. It's all in the front end. It's all about getting that design asset there, and that design asset happens to provide really sophisticated functionality. So we talked about something. Only 2 people know what the heck HAX is ahead of time. So maybe we should probably show why we're freaking out about this and why I have to drink a lot of coffee before we talk about this. So if you want to, locally, you can down the Wi-Fi by going to hackstheweb.org. That's what happened in New York City. So if you go to hackstheweb.org, you can play with the thing that I'm going to play with. And so, seriously, Tom, this is a shameless plug. Okay, so Tom edited my site here that I have. This is HAX running on a desktop app. And you'd say, wow, your team works on desktop apps. You must have a lot of people. Do we have a lot of people, Tom?
I mean, if me counts as a lot of people.
No, Tom does not count as a lot of people. We couldn't even pay him for that unpaid internship. So he has to go and pay us back by putting his resume up here. Tom's available for hire if anyone needs to hire someone super capable. He knows how to use HAX. He worked on this desktop app. But you might say, why are you showing a desktop app? You just said you were going to go to hackstheweb.org. Well, does anyone see this inspect tab over here? So this is what we're looking at with web components. That is a paper-toast tag. This is running in Electron. So now my development team, which is me, no, there's 3 other people. So there's 4 of us that work on these things, that work on Elm's Learning Network and projects surrounding it, HAX being a big part of that. We can work on a desktop app simultaneously as a Drupal 6 site. You'd say, I don't use Drupal 6. I know, but bear with me. It's going to keep going. So what is HAX, right? If I want to deface Tom's resume here, right? In the case of this app, I click and it's firing an event that tells HAX to load in. HAX in this case is this bar across the top. And it's supplying this authoring experience. So I'd say, Tom, well, your resume needs to be larger, buddy, if you're going to get hired, right?
You're right.
Right? And it probably should be the most prominent thing on the page. So we'll move it back up.
Oh, this is why I'm not getting hired.
This is why you're not getting hired thus far. Yeah, it shouldn't say hire me. It'd say, please hire me. Right? Like that.
Yeah.
Like today. Okay, and then we'd update it. And so we had to go to a lot of training in order to meme and troll Tom right now. Or we learn how to deal with HAX, learn that it can edit whatever we're selecting in this case. These are other components, right? So you might see the labels here. It says styled image. Tom, it's brilliant. You better zoom in. You gotta really emphasize the thinking with Tom.
Right.
The thinker, right? But we need some alt text. And so here's another part of getting towards accessibility. This form is generated by a web component. The inputs of each of them are themselves web components. And then in the case of this one, this is an alt text monitoring web component. So if I type this, you'll see that Tom is in the green, right? To attempt to inform our content authors, hey, you need to leave at least like about a sentence worth of description. Now, is that going to eliminate accessibility? No. If this has some warning here, and so that screen readers don't say, an image of Tom, and then I hover over this and get feedback of, oh, by the way, screen readers will say the word image, so don't put that in a descriptive text. Every piece of what I just showed is accountable back to a single component. If an accessibility expert, way more skilled than me putting this silly thing together, says, well, actually, it should have these criteria as well, we can do a pull request that gets a single design asset and have that feedback integrated in it. So web components kind of allows us to change the game at some level. So let's go to a real website instead of Tom's resume here. This is embarrassing, Tom. I can't believe you did this.
My
Right.
bad.
So hackstheweb.org looks something like this. You might look at it and go, why do I care? Well, you hit edit to get the party started. And I'm going to actually remove everything that's in here. There's a lot of documentation as far as pointing you off to videos, pointing you to different parts of the specification for it, making fun of me most of the way through, as well as demonstrating some silly things like memes for potential or a code pen element. So we're going to clear all this. I can go to preferences, turn on developer mode, and show export panel. And we are going to take all that, I'm going to delete and hit import. So now I got a clean slate. All right, I'm going to put down a layout that is agnostic of a system. So we can work on everything in this site completely decoupled from anything, right? We don't have to worry about constraints of Drupal or WordPress or anything else. This is system agnostic conventions. So that if we had a 3-column grid and went, oh shoot, you actually need like a 2-column, I can just kind of start to do that in the UI. Delete that other item. Maybe you want to look for stuff from somewhere else. This add, find, make convention is intentional, takes a little getting used to, for sure, but we tried to mirror it to what a content contributor's mindset is when they go to create something, right? They either need to just update something that's right there, so I know I reach out and touch it, or they need to add something because I now have a piece of media or an image, a video to upload or something like that, or they need to go find something at whatever the asset repository is. So imagine if these things under find, in this case, are just examples. This is not to say HAX magically works with YouTube. This is to say it kind of magically works with anything that supplies a JSON API. So in this case, I want to search YouTube for Elm's Learning Network, because that used to be what I talked about all the time. And I can show you a preview of the previous version of the platform. Select it. And now I've got a responsive YouTube video correctly embedded that will work on mobile, and it took the metadata off of the YouTube API. I don't want to even think of how much HTML that was to write previously, but this is a single web component traced back to a video-player tag. In fact, if I right-click, inspect, we can pull that up, and you'll see there it is, video-player, which then gives me accountability if there's an accessibility issue with this. If the YouTube API updates, God forbid, and breaks all of my videos with the way that I'm calling for some piece of data, I have the traceability to go back and update that one asset. All right, let's close that away. Obviously, we didn't just do video, though, so one of the other conventions we noticed with our own content contributors was that they would actually be creating something in the UI itself. Let me scroll this down a little bit. There we go. And so in that case, it was, well, hey, I have something I want to make, right? And I might be a more advanced piece of HTML or integration. So the silly one that I had to meme before, but it might be like, I want to reference Wikipedia. And this gets a little education specific with the Wikipedia tag. But what we end up doing is making a Wikipedia tag, and in this case, we can search about Drupal. And you're seeing a little bit of like, okay, what the heck is going on here? This is a two-way data binded form whenever things are in this state in HAX. And so anything I update here is going to basically be injecting into, in this case, it's a Wikipedia-query tag. And so using web components in this way, thinking of our design assets as almost these little mini APIs, we can start stitching stuff together in kind of ridiculous ways. So let's take that video, for example. The video's there, and I'm going to convert it to something else. You're supposed to say, no, Brian, don't do that.
Don't do
Tom,
that, Brian, no.
Well, Tom, it's fine. I'm gonna turn it into a QR code. You got the QR code module, right? And then you implemented it in your template, and then you rendered it out through this hyper-specific thing that we can't figure out why we're unable to hire people specific to Drupal to do, right? Or you jump on the JavaScript wave that's going to come crashing down and demolish all of us and do something like that, right? That is taking all of the API, treating my design as an API. It took my video-player tag. It took a QR-code tag. Screw up there. And then it kind of said, oh, well, this thing claims to be a source, and QR code, you have something called source. Let's just stick that in that field there. So now this is a QR code. Or I don't want it to be a QR code anymore. I want it to, I don't know, be a link of some kind, right? It's kind of taking our front end and treating all these design assets as a data API. So while I'm showing these very specific design assets, these elements under our Make tab here, these are not required for the system to use. You can supply your own. You could overwrite what our definitions are. The whole thing is pluggable, both on the way that you make stuff, the way you find stuff, and the places to add stuff we'll get to in a second. But we're in a government facility. We should probably be talking about NASA, because NASA is awesome. Rockets. Everyone likes rockets. And NASA also has a public API, so it's really useful to search in public demos, and it comes out of the box with HAX. So, robots to Rocket City. So here's some examples of kind of this integration between finding something someplace and making something somewhere else. So in this case, these are all the different possible ways of rendering what something claiming to be an image is. This is completely variable. We started day one with 1, and then we had a request from someone, and we built a static website. And that static website had a testimonial on it. And the images are not loading off of NASA, which is why I loaded these pages before the Wi-Fi got screwed up. But so the design asset in this case is called, where's it? Person-testimonial. So this little person-testimonial was made for a different website. It was not made for a content contributor-based website with HAX. It was made for a public-facing website to brand an agency. It's a department at Penn State. We'll call it an agency for this. And so by creating that component and working in components, no matter where we work, we are able to pull that back out and wire it into HAX. So slight detour into code here. So what the heck is a person testimonial? Testimonial, okay. Person testimonial was made by Chuck Lavera, who works on our team in Eberly College of Science. So Chuck needed to present like, hey, faculty love working with us, right? We'll say that was the use case, or the client X likes working with us. So Chuck uses other web components people have already made, things like PaperCard, which generates a card, Iron Image, which handles lazy loading of images, and then references, what we have here is called HAX body behaviors. It's just kind of part of an element we graphed on the settings of. He then went and we've got some CSS that's scoped super close to what it is. We did actually throw out Sass in the process of moving to this, so we don't have Sass anymore in our workflows. Now, this gets slightly Polymer. We use something called Polymer. We didn't cover that. Web Components is a spec of the browser. There are many ways to generate web components. You can actually implement the spec by hand. It's super unreadable, and I'm sure all of us know primitive API types of work with JavaScript, right? However, Polymer kind of creates this kinder way of going about working with and building web components. Bringing in, it's supposed to be like Polymer, right? Like the glue that kind of flows between things to stitch it all together. And so it just makes it a little easier to work with things like Shadow DOM, to have style scoping and encapsulation automatically included, and to do nice things like this. Like it provides a partial element, which then you can define your properties. And when you define your properties, these will be available on your tag. All these things you can do without Polymer. So I wanted to make that clear. This gets confused a lot, like, oh, you're just pushing Polymer. No, Polymer makes this stuff really easy. I highly recommend Polymer. But Vue.js now via CLI, you can compile your asset down to a web component, a native web component to put in your build routines. Angular.js, the next or Angular, not AngularJS. Angular, the next version, also has this in the CLI. Skate is another library. Xtags is another library. Svelte is another library. Preact, another library that is compatible with custom element spec and web components. So in here, Chuck went through. He said, hey, this little thing is going to have elevation. It's going to have an image to reference. It's going to have a name. And then here's where the HAX integration comes into play. It's just a little tiny blob of JSON. And so we say, hey, is this thing able to be scaled? Sure. Can people position it, which starts to influence that editor? It says title, or Gizmo is the name of this thing. It says, hey, testimonial. And so by saying testimonial, that's how that shows up on this page, that when I search for testimonial, it's there, right? This is just some metadata to inform HAX of what this is. Then comes the settings form. We're using something called JSON schema. Has anyone heard of JSON schema? It's awesome. It is one of the most simple little schemas I've ever used, and it basically is expressing the data types for the data that comes across. And it does it very cleanly. There is a tag that I highly recommend looking into. It's called EcoJSON Schema. It's on webcomponents.org, and it lets you basically use JSON schema to auto-generate a headless form. And then when you type in the values, it data binds to what the values are on the other side. This allows you to leverage any component in the library in order to use it. So for example, in here, we have accent color. Accent color uses something, input method, color picker. So that's why when I select testimonial, I get a color picker. And there's no, like, I'm not doing anything crazy accounting for a color picker. It's literally here, which gets mapped to JSON schema saying, hey, the text value of this is located in hex color. And hex color comes off of this thing. So same, a code editor, whatever it is. We just start doing web components for everything. And so this entire time you say, this is a static site and a desktop, and I don't care. You say, that's great. Well, we use these components whenever we build anything in Elm's Learning Network. And you'd say, I don't use Elm's Learning Network. And I'd say, almost no one does. And I don't care. But we get design conformity across these things. And I don't know if your Drupal 7 sites load this fast, regardless of if they're local, but mine fly. Because these are doing headless node requests and then just dumping them into this space here. So we get huge performance gains. Also, I've seen 10,000 custom elements in the DOM and not have my CPU overclocking or cooking. Because it's almost like we're at a layer below where the rest of the libraries that you're going to implement are, as far as these specs. So again, you don't use Elms. I don't blame you. You maybe use Drupal 7, you're stuck there. So there's the HAX module for Drupal 7. As I know, every government site looks like Garland. And so then we're going to go in and we're going to search in here, and we're going to search Wikipedia for government. And we'll put in some article about government. Sure, put that in place. You'd say, all right, I don't have a need for that. Right? Maybe you supply your own templates, right? You don't have to use our templates. These are just examples of what you get out of the box. You don't have to actually use our layouts. These are just example layouts out of the box. You say, you did mention image uploading, Brian. And so drop that there. And HAX goes, ooh, I have a backend I can talk to, because the HAX module for Drupal has said, hey, there's a backend. All right, so I just uploaded it to the file system, and then I'm going to turn that into a meme. College is expensive. Update, it is very expensive. And that's what that graph is for. So that just uploaded to the Drupal file system, implementing the other call. I hit save, and now it's saved. It says, hey, we're going to leave the site. It does. And there's my changes that I put in place there. All right, I worked on this over here. Okay, let's do something weird. Let's go developer, export panel. This is all the HTML I just wrote. Now, obviously, for content contributors, you would not give them the permission that allows them to see this. But I'm going to take that stuff. I'm going to open, oh, hey, look, it's Drupal 8. And then I'm going to go into HAX mode for Drupal 8, which has total feature parity with the other one, because why? It's a single stinking tag on the interface. I'm going to delete everything that's there. I'm going to paste this in. I'm going to hit import. And this is a perfect migration of my content that is highly designed, really very highly designed. But it's over here now. And then I'll hit save. Whoops, maybe I shouldn't click that button. I should hit the save button. There we go. So I hit save, and now this content is available in the Drupal 8 site. All right, you don't use Drupal 8? Fine, go use Graph. Why? Because the implementations are super easy. 4 people on the team. This integration took like 2 hours to write, because it's just injecting a tag. If we can get that tag in the interface, we can more or less replace Gutenberg and CK editor types of workflows, because it's backend agnostic. So I can have all the same flows, no matter what of these I adopt, even if I go to Backdrop. Is anyone using Backdrop? Oh, no hands, Tom. That's... All right, but I've used Backdrop, and so when I leave the island for good and I go to Backdrop, I want to take all my stuff with me. Go, okay, but I need deeper integration. So you can say, but there's structured data. There's still a need for structured data. I don't disagree with you. And I have need for structured data. And that's why, again, this is web components. Why don't we make our own Drupal-specific tags then? So this tag is a little hard to see. This is called a CMS-token. A CMS-token will dynamically escalate a Drupal token. Those hideous blob things at the beginning that I said are total anarchy, right? We got to be able to create pathways to transition into the new world with crazy stuff. So CMS-token it comes with support out of the box as far as the web components module. If you're in Drupal 7, that part needs ported. But it's going to hit the back end, render that token, replace it in place. So what does that look like? If I refresh the page and hope the internet works, back at home base, maybe, or in this building even. Internet, there we go. Right? Little load spinner went, and it's going to grab that content, it's going to throw it in, and I have that video there. So we could have CMS-views tags, which I do, and we could have CMS-token and CMS-entity and CMS- whatever the heck we want, right? Everything we've been showing is completely decoupled, it doesn't mean that we throw Drupal away. We could still be pointing to and leveraging that backend that's super powerful for relational data. So because of this, because all this stuff is just decoupled, this is a little prototype I've been working on as well. So the site is made entirely out of web components. That design, that is a, whatever that system is called, a Medium. This is like a Medium-inspired blog, right? And so I can have design uniformity, use all these same components in this site, which is my personal blog in this case, and all I have to do is be able to inject that one tag, and if I can inject that one tag, I more or less have a full content management system. So this system is actually about 10 PHP files that are basically just brokering the fact that this content page saves to the file system. There's a DDEV, like Docker instance, Lando, and Vagrant, and what's the other one? Doxil, right? So because you don't need any requirements in what is going on under the hood. You just set up this thing that can run PHP. The PHP files just write the contents of what is being sent as a message there, and then you're good to go. There's BTO Pro CMS. There we go, and go to sites, HAX CMS. All right, page. So that page, that says header. There's like, should be the word what is right. I can't preview it here. Great new content. I'll just open one of those and see. Basically, whenever we hit save, it's just going to ship that to a static location. So how many microsites do we end up cramming into platforms like Drupal or WordPress or whatever that really we just want people to be able to edit a silly thing? So HAX CMS is kind of where I've been working. We'd say, well, but this is a Drupal event. I'd say, but because we're so decoupled with our designs, every ounce of effort I put into improving UX and usability and accessibility of that little system, I reflect into the assets. Everything else leverages the assets. So I would say this is much more a pitch for, oh, please use web components, right? HAX is kind of a crazier thing you can do with web components. We're always looking for contributors to that. And with that, I'm Brian.
And I'm Tom.
I'm Tom. So if anyone has questions, thanks.
So you were showing the accessibility with adding alt text. Is there a way to add the decorative alt text for the images?
The decorative alt text?
Which is a null.
Oh, like just nothing there? Yeah, so it doesn't evaluate, so it'll just be empty.
Just the empty.
Yeah, sorry, the question was, can you have decorative alt text? And in that setup, yes.
My understanding is that we used image source, so it's kind of like an include file, like the old days where you could change, so would you put in the full size image, and then if you want different places to adjust to the different size?
Yeah, so the question was, would we be able to have full-size images and adjust the size dynamically?
Yeah.
Just based on using the backend to do it. So those start to get into areas where it'd be like, okay, that's a conversation to have about having a like Drupal-image tag, which then takes the image entity and gives you size small or whatever. Oh.
So on the Drupal side, on the back end, you said you just have to write the endpoints so it can save the back. How is it actually saving right now in Drupal 8? Is it tying it back to fields? Is it just cramming it into one field?
So the question was, how is it saving in Drupal 8? The current integration is it just crams it in the body field. So opening that up to being a field formatter would be a next good step. I think another area that would be great for integration with something like this is that JSON generated form on the front end. If we had the ability to hit a content type that's been modeled on the back end, pull it back as JSON schema, render it, you fill it out, you could start to have almost like the node body is like the cached rendered copy of the thing, but is leveraging data off of all the fields to assemble it.
The body field, you're going to get revisions, workflow, and all
Yep.
that stuff. We probably aren't going to get a good search experience because it's good.
Correct. So yeah, we could kind of peg those together. There's certainly, like advantages, disadvantages of this right now. It's moonshot type of territory.
Can you speak to the browser compatibility issue?
So the question is,
What does that mean?
the question is browser compatibility issues. Polymer helps with that a little bit. as far, because we build our components in Polymer in part for that. So we can hit back to IE 11. It's supposed to be completely compatible back to IE 11. IE 10, you start to fall off the face of a cliff. But honestly, it's an insecure browser as marked by Microsoft. So as far as the other ones, the polyfills work for basically everything back 2 versions. You know, these are evergreen browsers now. When we reviewed government analytic data at DrupalCon Baltimore, at that time, which that was what, 2 years ago or whatever, having components on a page, 98.5% of all browsing traffic across all government sites would have worked instantly. In my mind, that starts to hit a level where you go, all right, let's talk about a strategy for server-side rendering and pushing the server-side rendered copy out. Heartbleed actually kind of helped a lot with this. It, in a weird way, because Heartbleed had sysadmins saying, that old browser's not working here, sorry. And so it kind of, I think, forced a lot of people to upgrade. Yes?
I wanted to ask, you're looking at this page right now behind you, and you just wanted to edit a few sentences and see how it would fill in.
Yeah.
Can you do it right there, or do you have to keep going back to the container and then pull it into the web and back and forth?
As far as you mean, like, can I just reach on edit this?
Yeah, can you just edit? Yeah, okay, so you can do that. You don't have to go back to where it is.
No, yeah, sorry. So that paradigm of the question was like, do you have to go and pull it back into kind of the fly out thing to work on it? That paradigm is for the more advanced assets. Thank you. I skipped it. Everyone always asks, like, this can just edit normal text, right? I'm like, oh yeah, of course it can. And I skipped that entirely. So thank you. Resizing dynamically and it happening on the back end? No, this is mostly just like kind of messing with the scale. I mean, I can mess with the scale of this, but that's just stretching it at the moment currently.
Show us the image of how this, if you were to say an like a spreadsheet or something,
Can I generate a table from a spreadsheet?
yeah.
It does have that element. These seem like planted questions. Now, so there's a CSV element, and I don't know if I have I do have a CSV file somewhere. So that's a 100% accessible table as generated by a CSV file. Yep. Yep. And so again, that's the way we made that element. If it needs issues, or you go, well, we envision that differently, or maybe that CSV table comes from some Drupal, storage in the back end, all that becomes available. What time do we have to? Sorry, what time do we? Because a lot of people are moving around. What time is this over?
Well, I know that the next person to volunteer will probably be in here in like 2-3 minutes. So.
Okay. So how about?
Session starts at 2, so figure your shit out before that.
Gee, thanks, Beck. All right. So 2 minutes and we'll wrap up. So, well, yeah, 2 questions.
So you mentioned so say you were pulling that data from Drupal tag build, that wouldn't be editable.
The Drupal tag.
Like if you had like that as like a view, like that table that was a view.
If it came from a Drupal, like let's say there was, the question is if it was a Drupal view, it wouldn't be editable if it came in via tag. Right? So could it be editable? Ooh, that's a better question. So the Web Components module, which hasn't been ported to Drupal 7 or 8, in Drupal 7, it has a mode where it takes your design assets, turns them into entities, and then turns those into display modes. So you could take a view, pipe, and with no templating, just tell the view that at this display, or come out as this display mode, go into the fields area, and use the display mode to map the properties of the element through the data of the node or whatever, so that then you'd have no templating required to actually output the design. If the thing that's coming out of the design is HAX capable, in this case, right? If it has that schema attached to it, the way that HAX knows about the elements is when they get attached to the DOM, it fires up an event that's uniform with that blob in it. So if it was a view that put its data down and it was editable in some way, all the logic of that's internal to that little design element in Outbound. So I mean, it's possible. I'm not saying it does that right now, but it's certainly possible. Yes.
Does it have real-time collaboration where multiple users can edit the same page?
The question was, does it have real-time collaboration? No. We'll just say no. That's a lot safer answer. I was just informed at New York Camp about something called Beaker Browser. I highly recommend checking it out. I really think it could be a game changer for projects like this. And me and Tom and Mike were sitting around last night and we're doing live reloading and changes to each other's stuff in a decentralized manner. So I don't want to say yes, it does that right now, like that would be lying, absolutely, but like we're certainly looking towards those types of things. All right, one more question. You get a second one in here.
So, what does it look like if you're trying to port pattern lab to this?
Oh, okay, question was, what does it look like if you're trying to port Pattern Lab to this? Now, to this, is that HAX in your question or web components? If it's web components, then it could be, so you take your atoms or molecules or whichever, and you go, well, actually, no, not whichever. I would start at the atoms, the atomic level, and take a link or button or whatever it is, and I would just make an element that, and then copy the guts of what that other thing is and place it in there would be the best place to start. A lot of these elements, we actually kind of work that way because we're also progressively decoupling off of our own horrific workflows that we used to have. So we, have laid something out and designed it in material, for example. Take that design and rip it out of our views template, and then we throw it in a standalone headless component, do the data wiring. Another major advantage of Polymer, so as a last thing here, is that, that's not gonna work, is that it comes with a CLI that allows you to auto-generate files and documentation for your individual element, and a really simplistic workflow to punch that up to GitHub. And so of those 193 assets, I can tell you 193 of them are documented with this little microsite. So as you build out the structure and say these are what these properties are and what they do, you get that here as a standalone component so you can demo and view what that is. So I would take that element, pipe it through this, right? Make sure it works as a standalone, then rip it out of where it was in production, reference the element, and put that there. So it's kind of a progressive coupling. I don't know that it outright replaces Pattern Lab. I think it could complement it really well, though. If you have good Pattern Lab ingestion into Drupal workflows, this could allow you to tack onto that, but also escape the island of Drupal to basically repurpose as design assets and static systems or whatever. Cool. So me and Tom will be around the event. Thank you so much for sticking around and listening, and have a great rest of the con.